Starship Troopers wasn't just a sci-fi war movie, it was fascism in spacesuits. A film that made militarism look sexy while secretly mocking everything audiences were cheering for. But behind the bug-blasting propaganda and shower scenes, nothing was sincere. The director was Dutch and hated American militarism. The leads were models pretending to be soldiers, and the movie that looked like mindless action was actually graduate-level political satire. These are 10 subversive facts about Starship Troopers. 1. The AntiHeinline Rebellion. Paul Verhoeven never read Robert Heinlein's novel and deliberately created a movie that mocked everything the book celebrated about military service and citizenship. The original novel was serious military science fiction that promoted disciplined service and earned citizenship through combat duty. Verhoeven received the script adaptation, but found Heinlein's militaristic themes repugnant to his European sensibilities and personal experiences growing up in Nazi-occupied Holland. The director intentionally transformed the source material into biting satire that made military propaganda look absurd while maintaining the surface appearance of patriotic entertainment. Verhoeven's approach included exaggerating the book's military elements until they became obviously fascistic rather than heroic, using visual references to Nazi imagery and propaganda techniques. The movie's tone completely inverted Heinlein's sincere celebration of military virtues, creating anti-war commentary disguised as pro-war entertainment that many audiences initially missed. The Nazi propaganda masterclass. The recruitment videos and news broadcasts weren't just parody. They were precise recreations of actual Nazi propaganda techniques that Verhoeven studied to create authentic fascist media. The director researched Leni Riefenstahl's films and other Third Reich propaganda to understand how authoritarian governments use media to glorify violence and military service. The "Would you like to know more?" segments deliberately mimicked interactive propaganda that made audiences complicit in requesting more militaristic content. Verhoeven's Dutch background gave him personal insight into fascist propaganda methods, having witnessed Nazi occupation and understanding how seemingly patriotic messages could normalize authoritarian control. The fake news broadcasts included subtle visual and audio cues that referenced real Nazi propaganda films, creating uncomfortable parallels that many American audiences didn't recognize. The propaganda sequences were so convincing that some viewers initially thought they were watching genuine military recruitment material rather than satirical commentary. The model army casting. The leading actors weren't chosen for acting ability. They were deliberately cast as attractive but wooden performers who would look like propaganda poster models rather than real soldiers. Casper Van Dien, Denise Richards, and Neil Patrick Harris were selected specifically because they resembled idealized Aryan specimens from Nazi recruitment material. Verhoeven wanted actors who looked perfect but felt artificial, creating performances that seemed like propaganda rather than authentic human drama. The casting approach prioritized physical appearance over dramatic talent, making the characters feel like manufactured products rather than genuine individuals with complex personalities. The actors' lack of military experience and sometimes stilted delivery was intentional, creating performances that felt like recruitment video actors rather than seasoned combat veterans. The model-like casting helped emphasize the movie's themes about how fascist governments use attractive imagery to sell ugly ideologies to susceptible populations. The shower scene democracy. The co-ed shower scene wasn't just gratuitous nudity. It was political commentary about how fascist societies eliminate privacy and individual autonomy in favor of collective identity. The sequence depicted a society where personal modesty and individual boundaries had been eliminated in favor of military efficiency and group conformity. Verhoeven included the scene to show how totalitarian systems normalize the elimination of privacy by presenting it as progressive equality rather than authoritarian control. The actors' comfort with nudity represented characters who had been conditioned to surrender personal boundaries for the supposed benefits of military service and social integration. The shower scene's casual attitude toward nakedness reflected the society's casual attitude toward violence and individual rights, showing how fascist systems desensitize people to boundary violations. The sequence served as visual metaphor for how authoritarian governments strip away individual protections while claiming to promote equality and efficiency. Number 5. The Bug War Philosophy. The alien bugs weren't just monsters. They were deliberately designed as faceless enemies that could justify unlimited military violence without moral complexity. The bugs' lack of individual personality or recognizable humanity made them perfect propaganda enemies that audiences could hate without ethical concerns. Verhoeven created the bug war as satire of how governments manufacture external threats to justify military expansion and authoritarian control over domestic populations. The bugs' threat level was intentionally vague and constantly escalating, reflecting how fascist governments use fear of external enemies to maintain power and suppress internal dissent. The war's origins remain mysterious because fascist conflicts often begin with manufactured incidents that provide justification for predetermined military action. The bug design included subtle references to dehumanizing propaganda used against real human enemies in historical conflicts, showing how warfare depends on making enemies seem less than human. 6. The Phil Tippett creature revolution. The bug effects weren't just monsters, they were revolutionary practical effects that combined traditional stop motion with cutting-edge CGI to create creatures that felt genuinely alien and threatening. Phil Tippett's Creature Shop developed new techniques for blending practical puppets with digital enhancements, creating bugs that moved with realistic weight and biological authenticity. The practical effects approach meant that actors were interacting with real creatures rather than tennis balls, creating genuine fear reactions and authentic combat responses. Each bug type required extensive design work to create distinct alien biology that felt evolutionarily plausible while remaining visually spectacular for action sequences. The creature development included studying real insect behavior and anatomy to create alien movement patterns that felt genuinely non-human rather than simply monstrous. The practical effects work influenced subsequent creature design in science fiction films, establishing techniques for creating believable alien life forms through hybrid practical digital approaches. 7. The violence celebration trap. The movie's graphic violence wasn't just action spectacle. It was deliberately excessive to test whether audiences would cheer for fascist brutality when presented as entertainment. Verhoeven included increasingly disturbing violence to see if viewers would continue supporting the characters, despite their obviously authoritarian behavior and casual cruelty. The violence escalation paralleled real fascist society's gradual normalization of brutality through propaganda and social conditioning that makes extreme measures seem necessary and justified. The director wanted audiences to recognize their own complicity in cheering for violence, creating uncomfortable self-awareness about how entertainment can desensitize people to authoritarian messaging. The graphic combat scenes included visual references to real war crimes and military atrocities, testing whether context and presentation could make audiences support obviously immoral actions. The violence served as both entertainment and moral tests, revealing how easily people can be manipulated into supporting brutality when it's packaged as heroic action. 8. The Citizenship satire system. The movie's citizenship through service concept wasn't just world building, it was direct criticism of American military recruitment practices and economic conscription that targets working class populations. The fictional society's requirement of military service for voting rights reflected real concerns about how economic inequality creates pressure for military enrollment among people with limited civilian opportunities. Verhoeven's European perspective allowed him to see American military culture as potentially fascistic in ways that domestic filmmakers might not recognize or critique. The citizenship system satirized how democratic rights can be restricted through seemingly reasonable requirements that actually exclude populations unlikely to support existing power structures. The movie's federal service propaganda resembled real military recruitment messages that promise education, citizenship, and social advancement through combat duty. The system's presentation as progressive advancement concealed its actual function as social control mechanism that eliminated political opposition through military indoctrination. 9. The Neil Patrick Harris Nazi uniform. Neil Patrick Harris's final uniform wasn't just costume design. It was precise recreation of Nazi SS officer attire that made the movie's fascist themes impossible to ignore. The black leather uniform, peaked cap, and insignia directly referenced Third Reich military fashion, creating visual parallels that connected the fictional society to historical fascism. Harris's character arc from idealistic student to intelligence officer reflected real patterns of how intelligent people can be corrupted by authoritarian systems that offer power and status. The uniform reveal served as the movie's most obvious satirical moment, making explicit what had been subtle throughout the film's critique of militaristic society. The costume design included authentic Nazi details that European audiences would immediately recognize, while American viewers might miss the historical references. Harris's comfort wearing obvious Nazi imagery reflected his character's complete indoctrination into fascist ideology and loss of individual moral judgment. The box office misunderstanding Starship Troopers initially failed at the American box office because audiences didn't understand they were watching satire, expecting straightforward military action rather than political commentary. The movie's marketing emphasized action and special effects rather than satirical elements, creating audience expectations that the film deliberately subverted. American audiences in 1997 lacked sufficient cultural distance from their own military culture to recognize Verhoeven's critique, seeing patriotic entertainment where Europeans saw obvious fascist parody. The film's commercial failure reflected the success of its satirical approach. The propaganda elements were so convincing that many viewers accepted them as sincere rather than ironic. Starship Troopers wasn't just bug-hunting action. It was democracy's nightmare dressed in Space Marine armor. From Nazi uniforms to propaganda masterclasses, this fascist satire proved that sometimes the most dangerous movies are the ones that make evil look heroic. Hit that subscribe button to join the mobile infantry and tell us. Would you like to know more? Service guarantees citizenship, but critical thinking is still optional.